So here we are in Studio 2. We've already done the first to-do, which is this description. And now what we're going to do is the second thing, so we're going to disable the button. So we're going to use this prop function, and this is sort of like another one you might have seen, attr, A-T-T-R. I feel like have we had an example of that yet? Yeah, I don't know, where is that one? Oh, it's later in the student? Okay, well, we'll see it soon. So you give it the name of the property that you care about, and then like the value. And in this case, the name of the property you care about is disabled. So in HTML, you can label an element as, or you can set an element to be disabled, which means that it can't be like interacted with. And jQuery gives us an interface for doing that, which is this prop function. So we're going to say disabled, and just by way of example, I'm just going to put true in here. So now all our buttons, immediately they're just going to be disabled, just to show how that works. If it works. Yeah. So now they're all disabled. So this is how you set the disabled property on these. So if I said false, obviously they would not be disabled. So we don't want to hard code true or false. We want this value to be dependent on whether the movie is already in the list. So the way we can do that is using this function called indexOf, which you can call on an array. And so the array we have, the array we care about here is model dot browse items, right? Dot index of this movie. So what this is going to do, this function is going to return to us the index of this particular movie in this array, if there is such a movie in the array. So yep, should be watchlist items, my bad. Thank you. So the index of this movie in watchlist items might be something like 3, because it's the 4th element in the array. Or if it's not already in there, what this function does is it returns the value -1, and -1 just signifies I didn't find this thing in the array. So if this is 3, then we want to disable it. If this is 7, we want to disable it. If this returns to us anything other than -1, then we want to disable it. So what I can do is create a Boolean here by saying this whole thing does not equal -1. Does that make sense? So this expression is ultimately going to evaluate to true or false based on whether the movie's in there. Question? Yeah, why the double equal? So jQuery JavaScript has this sort of like 2 levels of equality. And yeah, this is something we never really talked about. So instead of saying negative, I'll just deal with say it was this, right? So you can say double equals in jQuery, and it means one thing. You can say another thing, triple equals, and triple equals is like a more specific version of equality. The reason why is jQuery lets you compare things of different types. So if you compare like an empty array with the value of false, it lets you do some like kind of sort of cool fancy stuff, sort of weird stuff. I'm going to give a quick example here. Also, this is a good example of how you can like type stuff in the dev tools to just play around. So I'm going to say 5 equals 5. That's true. 5 equals 5 is also true. So there's stuff like this. If I say empty array equals false, that's true. So there are times when you want to like treat something like an empty array as false for like doing conditions in a more succinct way. So equals, like in a normal language, this would say, no, these things don't equal each other because this is an array and this is a Boolean, right? But it returned true anyway. But so if I really want to know if they're the same, I'll say triple equals, and then it's going to say, no, these things aren't the same. Because the same with triple equals means they're the same type and the same value. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah, so double equals is like a looser version of equality. Good question. Any other questions about this? So this is going to evaluate to true if the movie's in the list, and false if the movie's not in the list, which is what we want. Yeah? Say that one more time. Oh, why do I not have anything right here? Yeah, good question. So, in fact, I do. It's just kind of weird because this previous thing is this click. So yeah, you guys read that part in the description about this sort of alternate syntax in jQuery. If you're chaining a bunch of these method calls together, you skip to the next line. And this one, it really looks like there's nothing here, but that's only because the previous one was this click function, which the last thing in this click function is like just this closing bracket, so it kind of looks like there's nothing there, but the previous, there is a previous thing, and it's this whole thing. Yeah. Great, so let's check and see if that works. I'll make this bigger too. Seems to have not worked. What did we do wrong? We didn't save. Yes. Still seems to have not worked. What did I do wrong? Did I get it backwards? Maybe I got it backwards sometimes. I don't know. I'm just going to try this because I'm a little confused. So now they're all... Oh yeah, totally got it backwards. Am I the only one confused? Should I stand here and try to work this out, or does everyone feel comfortable with it? Is everyone like, no, of course it should be triple equal? This sort of thing happens, you know, it's kind of like those off by one errors, and you're like, do I want index 4 or 3? And it's like, you never really get better at that. You just stop and think about it. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to assume this worked and not actually try to convince myself that it's right. And we can come back and do it later. So apparently, we solved this. I'm going to mark these down as we go. Okay, item number 3. So each time we make a watch list item, and that's these things up here, we want them to be those orange rectangles. So we're going to have to apply CSS styles to them. So in order to do that, let's give them a unique class name so we can apply styles to that class. So that's item number 3. Yeah, and here's where we're using, okay. We're going to give this element an attribute, specifically a class attribute. That's this element here. And that class is going to be item-watchlist. And that's it. That's all we have to do there. We might be able to what? Did it just switch back? Maybe something weird happened when I saved. So maybe I did have this right. Save. taking a long time to say. Okay. Okay, now I feel a little less crazy. So we just gave class attributes to each of these list items, and yeah, you can see it right here, right? Li class equals item watch list. So now that these have a class, we can go on to step 4, which is going to be to add some styles to it. So we'll do that in styles.css file. To do number 4. So the first thing we're going to do is make a selector for these guys. And because it's a class, we use this dot selector. That's how you get things of a particular class. So anything with class item watch list, dot item watch list, we're going to apply these styles. And so the first thing it asks us to do is to give it a display property of inline block. Display inline block. And let's actually look at what happens when we do that. Okay, there's an item. Nothing, supposedly. Done. That's actually not what I was expecting. What if I had done... But you know what? I'm going to try just straight up inline. And then that should at least see what happens here. Yeah, so inline block is kind of a weird new, semi-new thing you can do in CSS. But the standard display properties, there's two big ones, block versus inline block, and various elements have a default one that makes sense. So normally for a list item, the styling is block, and what that means is each one takes up a whole line, and when you add a new one, it goes to the next line. But if we specifically override it like we did here and set it to inline, you can see the next item comes to the right in the same line as this one. And that's actually pretty much what we want. So inline almost works for us already for this orange square thing. The problem with inline, I'm going to make the window smaller, and hopefully it's going to demonstrate this. Wow, actually, I was expecting, so I thought one of the things with inline is it wraps around. So like this, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, is going to like snake. So like as soon as the window gets too small, that the Awakens is going to come down, but not the whole Star Wars, but it's actually behaving fine. So I can't demonstrate that. There's another problem with straight up inline, which is some of the we're going to want to apply margin and padding to these things, and you can't fully apply margins to inline items. It's kind of weird. So anyway, this new display value is created inline block, and it's kind of a hybrid of the two. And it's going to do what we want. Sorry for the hand waving there. So it's inline block, so what else do we want? We want an orange background color, right? And a white text color. Start with that. Did it not save? There we go. Okay, and the other thing we want is a lot more padding. So what that's going to do is make those big blocks of text in the middle. So you didn't have to get this. You didn't have to magically guess the right answer, but it was 60 pixels of padding. Slow to react again. Okay. There we go. Better. The other thing we want is some margin. So what margin is going to do is margin creates space around an element, and that's going to give us some space between each thing. And in fact, the margin we want only to be on some of the edges. So first I'll just demonstrate regular. So there's 10 pixels is what I had in the solution, but you could have done anything sort of near that. Man, every time. Slow to take my changes. There we go. So this is actually 20 pixels of margin because, you know, this one has 10 and this one has 10, so combined they have 20. And if I add some more, yeah, they start dropping down to the next line, which is good. So this is actually pretty much fine. But there's just some nitpicky things. So like, notice how the edge of this thing is like indented from the edge of the list, and I don't know if we want that. And also this 10, 20 thing is kind of bothering me because like, if I'm counting on the fact that it's 10 because I knew it was 10 for some reason, then I want it to be 10, I don't want it to be 20 in reality. So yeah, anytime with something like this, like you've got a list of things and then you want a separation between them. If they both have that separation, then obviously it gets doubled. So standard thing to do is just only put the separation after the first one or before the second one, but not both. So, and it's also just a good demonstration of the fact that you do this, which is specify each side individually. And there's two ways you can do this. You can say margin on the top margin to be 10 pixels, like that, margin hyphen top. And let's do margin right. So this is one style. I forgot a semicolon? Yeah. Thanks. Forgot this colon. Thank you. Let's see if this does the trick. Yeah, so now it's lined up over here, and it's a little thinner over there. Make sense? And then there's an alternate syntax for doing this. You can do it all in one line. You can specify just margin, and then do 4 things. In the order they go in, you can just memorize this or something. It starts at the top, and then it goes clockwise. So top, right, bottom, left. So I'm going to say 10, 10, 0, 0. I think I got that order right. We'll find out. Yeah, that looks right. Does that make sense? Cool. So that's it for step 4, I believe. Yeah, these look good. Step 5, we're asked to give everything a gray text color, or color property, but it's the text color. And the hint we're given is, you know, don't go in here and just start adding this to all these other ones, right? We just have to make a new selector. I'll do this first. We need something, and this something is going to be some kind of parent container element. And when you apply a style to a container, all the children that are inside of it automatically inherit that style. So we only have to define this one place. So the place we're going to do this is actually just body. Body meaning this body. It's the body of the page is a element just like any other, you know, H2 or anything else. So you can apply styles to it. Got a semicolon. And you can always override that. So like this guy here has a white text color, and that's going to take precedence, even though it's inheriting this gray text color, the white's going to override it because it's more specific. So that gives you gives you this nice way of defining parent styles, but always you have the option of overriding it when you care to override it. So now our text is gray, looks a little nicer. Any questions about that one? Cool. Okay, our next task is here. So now we're going to start adding that form for users to search for specific movies. So nothing too crazy about this form. I'm going to give it an ID so we can search for it, or so we can reference it later. What was it? Form search, I think. And we're going to put 2 inputs inside of here. The first one is a text field. And whenever we have these things, we probably want to give them a name attribute. And this represents like the key that the data is associated with, like whatever it is that the user typed in is going to have this key name. And I think, what did I say, query in the thing? Anyone remember? Or was it search term? Was it query? Okay. And another input, a submit button. Type equals submit, value equals, and this just tells us what text is in there, or what text is displayed on the button, and it was search by title. Let's see if our form showed up. Great, here it is. Nothing happens yet when we, or actually something does happen because we didn't cancel it. So this is a nice thing. So by default, the form is always going to go somewhere when you submit it. And if you don't tell it where to go, the place you would normally tell it is up here. You would give it an attribute. You guys saw this in the graffiti problem set and some of the module 6 stuff, right? And module 7, action, right? This is the attribute that determines where we're submitting the form to. And if you don't give it something, it's going to just default to the page you're already on. So that seems fine, but the problem is it actually goes to the page we're on. So it's going to refresh the page, and we don't want to refresh the page. So what we're going to do is add a submit handler to the form. And one of the things in the submit handler that we're going to do is cancel the default action so that the page does not refresh. And actually, I gave you guys starter code, right, for this? I didn't give you starter code? Ah, that was a mistake. Okay. Darn. So this one had a lot of components to it. So what we want to do is we want a submit handler on this form. So we're going to use jQuery again. And just like we could add click handlers to buttons, we can add submit handlers to forms. So I'm going to get the form. Okay, so this gives me the element whose ID is this, which is our form. I'm going to call this jQuery function submit. You can see even the parameter they're calling it handler, because the thing that we pass in is a function that will be called whenever the form is submitted. So maybe the first thing I'll do here is just log something. Form was submitted. And see if that actually works. I'm going to go to the console and look for that message to show. Yep, here it is. So far, so good? So the first thing, darn, yeah. I really meant to give you guys pseudocode, because so one of the things you have to do here is, and this was all in there, to be in the pseudocode, it's my bad there. So one of the things you can do in this submit handler function is ask for a parameter. I'm going to call it EVT, short for, I'll just call it event. So you can ask for each event like this, like a form submission or a button click, it sort of is an event. It's a JavaScript object describing what happened. So we can receive that event as a parameter and do stuff to it. And the thing we want to do is cancel the default behavior, because we don't want the page to refresh. And there's a method you can call on this thing, event.prevent default. This stops the form from doing what it normally would do. And yep, so I meant to just give you guys kind of this whole skeleton. But now you know. So now when I click this, theoretically the page should not actually refresh. Yeah, that's good. So now on to the actual stuff we want to do. This form was just submitted, so the person wants to search for movies with the title of whatever they typed. So we have two steps really. We want to figure out what it is that they typed by querying the DOM and saying, hey, what text exists in here? And then we want to call this other function that we haven't actually implemented yet, but we will soon. And actually, I'm going to put a log statement in here so we know if we actually successfully called it, which theoretically we won't have too much of a problem with. Oh, you know what I'm actually going to do? I'll come back to that in a sec. So, okay, so two steps. Figure out what the user typed, then call the search movies function. So to figure out what they typed, jQuery again, what we want is this thing. We want the value that is typed inside of this element. So first we have to get this element, and we don't have a direct reference to this input here, but we do have a reference to the form that contains it. So I can say again, ID form search, and then I can say space input, which is kind of like what we did in the previous studio with something like this, right? Section watch list ID, give me the UL inside of that thing, right? So we're doing the same thing here. There's one difference, which is this form has two inputs inside of it, and we don't care about both of them. We only care about this one. And jQuery actually is going to return to us anything that matches the selector we give it. So it'll give us back multiple things. In this case, we don't want that because we only care about the first thing. So I can use a more complicated selector here, similar to what we did here. Oh, and I also meant to have you guys do this example before you got to that one so that you were already familiar with this. I think I made these changes and then somehow an old version was still up on the site. So sorry about that. So I'm going to briefly go over what this is doing here. So this is a CSS rule that I applied to all buttons. Let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do this before we do that form submission. So this says we want to make the buttons orange and we want to give them some padding, right? So we're in the CSS file right now. And notice how I'm applying this rule to both buttons, every button. But if I only did the button, it wouldn't. I also want this button to be orange and everything too, but this is technically not a button, it's an input, right? So if we want the style to apply to that as well, then I had to say, okay, we want this to apply to buttons and inputs, but we don't want all inputs, we just want the inputs whose type equals submit. Does that make sense? At least at a high level. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is the syntax you can use to do that. You can say, you can select for specific types of inputs. You can say, only give me the input with where this attribute equals has this value. And that's how we select for only those one kind of inputs. So I'll show you how that, I'll prove that this works here. This is our example one. I'm going to turn all the buttons orange. Yeah. So the buttons turned orange, but also this thing turned orange. And if I hadn't done this, I'll just also show you this. If I don't specifically ask for those inputs, look at this. This is also an input, but it's the wrong kind of input. And we don't want this thing to be orange. We want it to be white. And so we use this syntax. Give me the type of element, and then give me, say, and then filter out saying I only want elements where this particular attribute type has this value, submit. So anyway, here we are in the same situation. We want inputs, but we only want inputs where the type is text, right? We don't, in this case, we don't want the submit button. So I can do the same thing. Here I can say input type equals text. And I'm going to use single quotes because I'm already inside these double quotes from my larger jQuery selector string. So if I didn't mess something up, this should give me this input. And then to get the actual value out of that, we use this function .val. Someone was asking about .val on Tuesday. I forget what the context was. But so this is what that does. .val, it gives you the current value inside of that element. So let's just, first thing let's do, let's just say search term equals this, and then log it to the console and see if it's working. So if I search for Lego, I should see Lego down here, but I'm not seeing it. It could just be that problem again where this isn't saving properly. I'm going to save this as well. I'm going to clear this. Lego. Lego. We see Lego. Okay. So that means I didn't mess this up, which is always good. So this gives us, again, this gives us that particular input field, and then this gives us the value that's inside of there. So that tells us what it is that the user typed. So we got that. And then the last thing we want to do is call search movies, and we want to pass that thing in. So let's get a little familiar with that function so we know. So this function takes two arguments, a query, meaning this search term, whatever the user typed in, and a callback function. So it's very similar to this discover movies thing, except you also give it an extra argument, that query. So let's pass the search term in, and we should see now this log statement. I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna say now search, about to search for movies with title of query. And then we should see that right here. Let's see if that works. Lego. About to search for the title of Lego. It works. Great. One thing real quick, you might be wondering, hey, I thought that function takes 2 arguments and we only gave it 1, but it didn't crash or anything. So that's another sort of loosey-goosey JavaScript thing. Unlike C, there's nothing enforcing you. It's not going to crash if you fail to give it some arguments. We could even give it no arguments. Let's see what happens if it does that. Lego. About to search for movies, the title of Undefined. So if you do something wrong like that, everything's gonna keep working, but you might have an undefined value where you're expecting to have a real value. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. You're not gonna crash, but it might make it harder at times to track down a bug because it didn't crash 10 minutes ago, and you thought everything was working fine, but when you go to implement this is undefined, and you'll have to track it down. But so at any point, if you try to use a variable like this that you're expecting to be passed in, for example, and it wasn't passed in, it's just going to be undefined. So you're going to learn to hate the word undefined and see it all the time in JavaScript. So for now, let's go back and pass that in. And then the other thing we wanted to pass in was a callback function, and we can treat this exactly the way we do here when we're calling discover movies. Pass a callback function, we want the same exact one rendered. So we just want to, as soon as we make a request to the API and get something back, we just want to call this, this same render function to re-render everything on our page. So search term and the callback is render. Now we haven't actually implemented this function because that's our next thing, but over here we've done now everything that we wanted to do. Why are there these warnings on the side? Yeah, good question. It's saying $sign is not defined. So $sign is the sort of ubiquitous jQuery symbol. And so jQuery, right, is this JavaScript library we're using. To be actually totally honest, I don't know why the IDE is not recognizing that so we are including jQuery right here at the top, and for some reason it's not recognizing that. And it's in that source file that we included is where this variable is defined. So it should be defined, I guess somehow. Maybe this makes sense. So we're linking this from kind of 2 ways you can include a library. One is you can download the whole library and put it somewhere local and then link to it just like we do here. We've got a script, source equals, and then we give the local path to our FlickList.js file. That's one way to do it. And you can do that for something like jQuery. There's another way you can do it, which is just to use a kind of special URL on the internet where this thing lives. It's called a CDN, Content Delivery Network. It's delivering this content to us on demand. But I think this is only actually going to work in the moment when we open up the page and everything. So while we're here in the IDE isn't able to go here, and so it's not recognizing any of the jQuery stuff. Yeah. Cool. So we're done with step 7. Last thing to do is this search function. And so on this, we can do something very similar to this discover movies function. More or less the same, there's only a couple differences. So again, we're going to make an Ajax call. And we're using jQuery for this. And so one thing to keep in, it's hard to keep all these new things straight. So jQuery is a library that makes some functions available. Ajax is like a technique for querying servers, or talking to servers. jQuery just gives us tons of cool functions. One of that make our lives easier in JavaScript, and one of them is this Ajax thing. There's nothing inherently tying the concept of Ajax to the jQuery library. We just happen to be using it because it's nicer than doing it in like plain old JavaScript. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. So we're calling this Ajax function, and we're giving it, we want to give it sort of all this same stuff. We want to tell it what URL to go to. So for that, we're going to use this API.root. API is our object up there, and root is one of the properties, which is equal to the base beginning of the path, the beginning of the URL that we care about, and then we're going to add on the endpoint that we want. But our endpoint is going to be different. We don't want to go to this service of the API. We want to go to this other one, search. It should actually be, sorry, it should be search/movie. Search. Because they actually allow you to, they do other things besides movies. They do TV shows and stuff as well. So we say that we want to search for something, and specifically we want to search for movies. So this is the URL we want, and we also want to specify our API key, which we can do by passing some additional data in. So this is all the same. I'm even just going to paste this. But here again, there's an additional thing we want to pass in, and that's this query. So in this this data object, we want to tell them an additional thing. And I believe I remember from the API that the name of the key thing that we need is query. So it's a little confusing. So the key value query corresponds to this object, this value here, query. Maybe I'm going to rename this too, just to make sure to bring the difference home. So they're looking for something. They made up these names. The API made up these names, API key and query. And so for API key, we're passing in our key, and for query, we're passing in the search term that the user gave us. And finally, we want a success function, which they'll pass us the response, and then we want to do the exact same stuff that we do here. So some results came back from the API, and we want to update our browse items to be the results of that response, and then we just want to call the callback function that was passed in, which is render. So I'm going to say model.browse items equals response.results, and then I'm going to call my callback, and this, for now I'm going to say pretend I didn't have that, because I meant to not have that. It's not, could go either way there. Let's just pretend it's this way. It's easier to think about. And that's what we had last week. So this should have been like without, we're not passing the response into the callback. We're just calling the callback by itself. And the callback in this case is render, because that's what we decided it was going to be. So this success function is the exact same thing as this success function. The only difference between search for movies and discover movies is that we're talking to a different part of the API. And for search, we have to pass in one more piece of data. We have to tell it what we want to search for. So that's how and this is how we're doing that. Let's see if this works. Lego. Beautiful. So we got Lego stuff here now. So I think that does it for the quick run through the solution. I guess now I will take questions. Yeah. The vocarium thing asks for Studio 1. It's called Studio 1. Gotcha. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So in vocarium, the file is supposed to be called Studio 2, but something, I guess, went wrong, and it's called Studio 1, so you're not getting credit. So go ahead and rename that. And I think it's not too late, even though I published it, I can rename it as well, so I'll do that tonight after class. But if you want to do it now, you can do it now. Other questions? Yeah. 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 So we're going to go over in more detail the part where we disable the button, which is here. Okay, so let's go back for a minute to so far so good, right? This part makes sense? Okay. So the tricky part is when we start doing all this. So maybe what I'll do here is, instead of chaining these, I'm going to just end this statement here, and then I'm going to say, and we'll see why in a sec. I'm going to say button.prop. So this is the same thing, right? Does that make sense so far? So instead of chaining them all together, I made the button, and then later I said, and also make this button disabled. And now what I'm going to do, instead of like shoving this giant thing right there, I'm going to separate this into a couple lines. So I'm going to say first, index equals, I'm going to make a new variable, model.watchlist items So I'm going to call this index of function on the watch list items. So we're looking for this movie inside of this array, and it's going to give us back the index, and I'm going to store that in a variable called index. So this might be equal to -1 or 3 or whatever. Does this line make sense? Okay, cool. So now we know, so what we don't actually care about the exact number. We just care about whether we're just using that kind of as a proxy for determining whether the thing is in the array or not, right? So the thing we care about is just, is it -1 or is it something else, right? So I'm going to make another variable called is in watch list. I'm going to say already in watch list equals, and this is supposed to be a Boolean. So, if I hard coded it, it would just be like this. Already in watch list equals false or true or whatever. So for a minute, we'll come back to this. So now we have this thing, and assuming we set it equal to something, to the right answer, let's ignore this part for a second, skip down here. What we want to do is, if it's already in the watch list, then we do want to disable it, right? So the value of this variable represents the answer to the question, is it already in the watch list, right? So this is either going to be true or false, and if it's true, we want it to be disabled, and if it's false, we don't. So does this line make sense now? Cool. So then the only thing left to do is to make this something more reasonable, and that would be, it's already in the watch list if the index was not -1, right? So to do that, I just have to say index does not equal -1. Make sense? So yeah, I think working with Booleans this way is something that we didn't do a lot of in the CS50 stuff, but I think we probably should have. It lets you write nicer code, because notice we never had to do a stupid if-else statement here, right? Which is kind of nice. So I could have said, the more quick an intuitive way to do this is to say, like, if already in watch list, button prop disabled true, else button prop disabled false, and then I end up having to write this line twice, and the whole thing's a lot longer. So what you can do is you know, this is the, so imagine I have a if statement, if index does not equal -1, yada yada, right? The only reason this is easier to think about, kind of, so it's like the first instinct is to do this, but in fact the only reason this works is because anytime you make an if statement, the thing you put in between these parentheses, this thing ultimately just evaluates to a Boolean, a true or a false value. And so because of that, you can, instead of putting it directly in here, you can store it in a variable like we do here. And then you can use that variable directly, because we know that ultimately down here, all we have to do is pass it a variable. So it works out such that if this is true, or if this is true, then this is true, and then we ended up, it's as if we wrote true. And if it's false, it's as if we wrote false. Good question. Others? Yeah. Yeah. Wait, remind me where this was? Button, square bracket syntax for an array. It's like somewhere in this function. Maybe I'll, how many square brackets do I have in here? Search for it. Actually, that's it. This is the only ones in this file. Is it? It's in this script. Okay. This, you're talking about this thing? Yeah, okay. Your question was, could we use dot syntax for that? I think the answer is no. What do you have in mind? Like, what would it be? Like input dot something? Input dot. What would the something be? So one. Say it again. Yeah. So so actually this is a good, I didn't even really think about this. So an important thing to realize with something like this, you should really think of the stuff that goes in here, any sort of jQuery selector where you're trying to grab elements from the DOM, this is all actually, this isn't really, don't think of this as JavaScript, think of it really as CSS. Because jQuery took all their selector rules and stuff directly from CSS. So like this, right? So this is all like CSS syntax really. So there's no JavaScript involved, and these square brackets are maybe a little confusing because the only time we've ever seen them really so far is in that context of like arrays and stuff. But this is just a totally different meaning of the square bracket. Has nothing to do with arrays. It has to do with, I don't know, it's just someone made this up. Someone who wrote this, the way this part of CSS works, said, if we want to get elements where a certain attribute equals a certain thing, we put the attribute and the thing in square brackets with the equal sign and a yada yada. This one? Yeah. And so, the thing with jQuery is like this part, anytime you got like $, and then like you're doing a string with like some stuff in here, the stuff that goes in between these quotes is like, it's never going to be something that you wouldn't see in CSS. They're literally taking all the same syntax directly from CSS, and you just drop it inside quotes here. Does that make sense? So you would never do anything like JavaScript in here. You wouldn't say, I don't even know, right, console.log or something like this, or yeah. So I mean, I could see you having that thought. It's like, yeah, maybe the input is an object, and we can call some method on object like text or something. But that's all. So you would only ever do that in JavaScript. And like we are in a script here, we're in JavaScript, but in this little mini world between these two quotes, it's just like selector language, which is just CSS. More questions? Cool. So we got a couple minutes left, so we can call it. I could start just like going over stuff slowly and see if more questions bubble up, or we could just call it. Let's call it. Can you what? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'll do 1 and then 2, and then I'm trying to think. Hold on, I'm just trying to make sure there's nothing I have to announce. Well, hopefully not. All right, we're fine. I'm just going to stop my movie here.